Snow was falling hard on the grounds of Winterfell, covering the blood and ash that still lingered from the last battle. The North was wounded, broken in many ways, but not defeated. Inside the cold stone walls, Jon Snow stood near the gate, his face calm but his heart heavy. He had taken back Winterfell from Ramsay Bolton, but peace never lasted long in the North. As Jon looked out into the white blur of the storm, a rider approached alone, draped in black and red. Behind him, a small army followed banners with the burning heart of Rye flickering in the wind. Jon narrowed his eyes, already sensing something strange. When the rider got closer, the face became clear Stannis Baratheon, Jon's hands tensed by his side. Stannis was supposed to be dead. Reports said he was defeated by the Boltons and never returned. But here he was, riding toward Winterfell with fire in his eyes and smoke at his back. Stannis dismounted slowly. Behind him came the Red Woman, Melisandre, dressed in her usual flowing red robes. She looked unchanged, untouched by the cold, her eyes still glowing with the fire of her god. Jon had not seen her since she left Castle Black after the Battle of Winterfell. Her presence brought back memories he didn't want to face. They entered Winterfell's hall. The air between them was stiff, thick with tension. Davos Seaworth followed silently behind Stannis, eyes wary, scanning the hall like it was a battlefield. "You took Winterfell," Stannis said, his voice like grinding ice. "And yet, the war is far from over." Jon didn't answer right away. He didn't trust Stannis, not completely. "You're supposed to be dead. A man who serves the Lord of Light never dies easily," Melisandre said with a quiet smile. "We all have roles to play, Jon Snow." Jon looked from her to Stannis. "So, what now? You've come to take it back from me?" "No," Stannis replied. "I've come to make an alliance." Jon frowned. Alliances were not freely offered by kings, especially not kings like Stannis. There was something more here, something hidden. Jon could feel it in his bones. "We fight a greater war now," Melisandre added, stepping forward. "One not of thrones and crowns, but of life and death. The long night is coming again, and only those who stand together have a chance." Jon's eyes narrowed. "You speak of White Walkers?" "I speak of the end," she said softly. "And your role in stopping it." Jon hated the way she spoke in riddles. He hadn't forgotten that she once burned a child alive in the name of her god. He hadn't forgotten how many followed her blindly, only to be led to ruin. But still, she brought truths that could not be ignored. "Why now?" Jon asked. "Why not before? You left when we needed you." Stannis looked tired for the first time. "Because I was wrong before," he said. "And now I have seen the truth." Jon didn't trust easily, not anymore. He had died once, been betrayed by his own men. He had bled for the North, for Winterfell. But the war she spoke of, the true war, was coming. He could feel it too. In the cold, in the silence of the woods, in the dead things that moved in the shadows. "We don't have much time," Melisandre said. "The Night King marches. If we do not unite, we will all fall." Jon sighed and looked out the high window. The snow was falling harder now, as if the sky itself was warning them. The war for Winterfell might have ended, but the war for the world was just beginning. He turned back to Stannis and Melisandre. "Then let's speak like allies, not enemies." Their uneasy alliance had begun, but none of them could predict what price they would have to pay for it. The halls of Winterfell were never quiet, but that night a strange silence filled the air. Stannis Baratheon, Melisandre, and Jon Snow sat at the long table in the great hall. Flickering torches cast long shadows on the stone walls. Ghost, Jon's direwolf, lay nearby restless and growling low as if sensing something unnatural. Stannis leaned forward. "We both want to defeat the darkness, but we must agree on who leads." Jon's jaw tightened. "You still think you're the rightful king?" "I am," Stannis said, firm as steel. And I have not come here to bow. Melisandre's voice cut in soft but sharp. And yet, it may not be you who the Lord of Light has chosen. That turned all heads. Stannis looked at her, his eyes narrowing. What are you saying? I saw it, she said. In the flames, a man rising from death. A man with a direwolf at his side and fire in his soul. Jon's breath caught, and the words tasted bitter in his mouth. I'm no king. You may not want the crown, she said, but fate does not care what men want. Stannis slammed his hand on the table. He is a bastard. He is nothing. He is more than that now, Melisandre replied coldly. He returned from death. You saw it with your own eyes, Davos. Davos nodded, though his eyes were heavy with doubt. I saw it. But that doesn't mean he should sit the Iron Throne. Stannis turned his stare back to Jon. Would you betray me now, too? After I let you keep Winterfell? I never asked to lead anything, Jon said firmly. I lead because others follow. That's all. The tension cracked through the hall like ice beneath a boot. It wasn't just about titles. It was about destiny, power, and fear. They were no longer just men talking strategy. They were walking the edge of something much darker. Suddenly, a scream echoed from the courtyard below. Jon and Stannis jumped to their feet. Ghost growled louder now, his red eyes locked on the door. Jon rushed outside with Stannis close behind. Snow lashed against their faces as they reached the gate. One of the guards was shaking in fear, pointing at the woods beyond. I saw something, he said. Not a man. Not anymore. From the darkness beyond the wall came a soft sound. Bones cracking. Then silence. Then they saw it. A figure stepped out from the trees. Blue eyes glowing like death. Pale skin, rotting flesh. A white. And it wasn't alone. Behind it came others slow at first, but growing in number. Dozens. Jon drew Longclaw, the Valyrian steel blade shimmering in the snowlight. Get the archers on the wall, he shouted. The alarm bell rang. Winterfell burst into motion. Stannis drew his sword, and for the first time that night, there was no pride, in his eyes only fear. They're here, Jon whispered. The dead are here. Melisandre stood behind them, her hands raised toward the sky. Light the trench, she cried. They must not breach the walls. Flames burst around the outer ring, creating a wall of fire. The whites shrieked, but didn't stop. They clawed forward like mindless beasts, desperate to cross. Jon turned to Stannis. Still think we have time for a crown? Stannis didn't answer. Instead, he shouted to his men. Defend the gates. No one falls back. It had begun. The alliance was real now, not just in words. They stood together because they had no choice. But inside Jon's heart, a shadow grew. He remembered how Melisandre once spoke of burning a child to bring victory. He remembered betrayal, pain, and blood. He had made an alliance with fire and ambition. But would it save them or consume them? The sky above Winterfell burned orange from the flames of the trenches, yet it did nothing to warm the hearts of those inside. The dead waited beyond the fire, their blue eyes watching, unmoving for now. But Jon Snow knew it was only a matter of time. In the war room, tension crackled like lightning. Stannis stood over the map table, his jaw clenched. Jon paced the room, armor half strapped on, blood still drying on his tunic. Melisandre remained in the corner, eyes closed, whispering prayers to her lord. Davos slammed a dagger into the table to get their attention. We can't hold this place forever. That fire won't last the night. When it fades, they'll come again and harder. Jon nodded. We need a plan. If they breach the walls, we're finished. Stannis scoffed. Then we don't let them breach. We crush them before they get close. Jon shot him a glare. You think swords and honor will stop the dead? They don't bleed. They don't fear. You fought battles, but this is something else. Melisandre finally opened her eyes. There is only one way to survive this night. All eyes turned to her. She stepped forward, placing her hand gently on the table, over the center of Winterfell. "We must light the fire within." Jon frowned. "What does that mean?" She looked straight at him. "You. You must let go of who you were, and embrace who you are becoming." Jon's voice grew hard. "I am not your chosen prince. But you are something," she whispered. "You were brought back for a reason. I was brought back to fight, not to burn innocents in the name of a god I don't serve." Stannis banged his fist on the table. "Enough of this prophecy madness. We fight with steel, not riddles." Melisandre turned her head toward him, her voice colder than the snow outside. "And what did steel do for your daughter, my king?" The room froze. Stannis's face darkened, as if she had slapped him. Jon looked between them, confused, but Davos looked away, his face pale. "What happened to your daughter?" Jon asked slowly. Silence. It was Davos who finally spoke, his voice shaking. "She was sacrificed for fire, burned alive by this witch and her king." Jon took a step back, disgust in his eyes. "You burned a child?" Stannis's voice came low, filled with guilt and rage. "I did what I thought would win the war." "You lost," Jon snapped. "And you lost your soul in the process." Melisandre didn't flinch. "We fight against death. Sacrifice is the only language it understands." Jon turned away, his heart pounding. He had made a mistake, letting them into Winterfell, into his trust. He wanted to throw them out, lock the gates, fight on his own. But he couldn't. The dead wouldn't care about their sins. The dead were coming, and they were running out of time. Suddenly, a horn blew from the wall. Jon rushed out. Snow and fire clashed in the air as screams echoed from above. The dead were climbing the walls, throwing themselves onto the spikes, creating bridges with their bodies. Firelight revealed their rotting forms, clawing over each other, unstoppable. Jon raced up the stairs, lone claw in hand, Ghost beside him. A white leapt over the battlement and landed on a guard, biting into his throat. Jon cut it down in one strike, the Valyrian steel hissing as it sliced through bone. Another climbed up, and another. Jon swung again and again, his arms burning from the effort. Below, the gates shook as dozens of wights piled against them, trying to break through. And then the sound that froze everyone. A screech. Not human, not living. A shadow passed over the moon, massive wings cutting across the sky. Jon looked up, and there it was. A dragon. But it wasn't Daenerys' dragon. It was Viserion, dead, blue-eyed, burning with cold fire. The Night King had arrived. The roar of Viserion shook the sky as the undead dragon swept low over Winterfell. Cold blue flames exploded from its mouth, turning towers into frozen ruins and men into statues of ice. The walls groaned under the weight of death. Winterfell, proud and ancient, was being torn apart. Jon stood on the battlements, the wind whipping his cloak around him as he stared up in disbelief. His worst fears had come true. The Night King was here, not hiding in shadows anymore, but leading the storm himself. Below, chaos reigned. The dead had swarmed through a broken side gate where the flames had died out. Screams filled the night. Men fought, but their swords barely slowed the creatures. Wights climbed over corpses like ants, pulling down living men with icy hands. Stannis joined Jon on the wall, his armor bloodied, his crown lost somewhere in the battle. "We need to strike now," he shouted over the noise. "Go for the Night King. End him and we end them all." Jon didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the figure riding Viserion tall, cold, with a stare that burned straight through him. The Night King. Every instinct in Jon told him to face him, but he remembered Hardhome. He remembered what happened to men who charged into the night unprepared. Jon jumped down the stairs and ran through the courtyard, cutting down 3 wights on the way. Ghost followed, ripping one apart at the throat. Flames crackled as he reached her. "What are you doing?" he demanded, her eyes opened slowly. "Calling for help." Jon grabbed her by the shoulder. "There is no help coming. It's just us." "Not anymore," she whispered. Suddenly, the air shifted. From the eastern edge of the forest, a horn blew deep and thunderous. Figures emerged through the mist riders. Hundreds of them. Black cloaks, dark horses, and eyes filled with purpose. The Night's Watch, led by Tormund Jansbane. And with them wildlings, giants, and the last remnants of the free folk. They charged into the horde of wights with fury. Arrows flew, blades flashed, and the tide slowed if only for a moment. Tormund spotted Jon and grinned through bloodied teeth. "Thought you'd die without me, Crow?" "You're late," Jon shouted back. "Better late than dead?" But the joy was brief. Viserion screamed again and crashed down into the northern courtyard, blasting blue flame across the field. Men and monsters alike burned in icy fire. The dead dragon cleared a path toward the Godswood. The Night King wanted something. Melisandre's voice rose louder, her arms trembling. "Protect the weirwood tree," she warned. "He wants it." Jon realized it too late. The Godswood wasn't just a sacred place. It was old, magic deep, forgotten power. If the Night King destroyed it, something ancient would break forever. "He's not just here to kill us," Jon said. "He wants to end everything." Stannis ran toward the courtyard with his men. Davos followed close behind. "We hold the Godswood, or we all die." The final battle for Winterfell was no longer about survival. It was about the very soul of the North. Jon turned to Melisandre. "Can you stop him?" "I can slow him," she said, her voice weak. "But not without a price." He looked at her, heart pounding. "What price?" She smiled faintly, almost peacefully. "The one I've always known I would pay." She stepped past him and into the flames, her red robes catching fire as she walked. She began to chant, louder and louder, until the fire twisted upward into a spiral like a beacon to the gods themselves. Jon stared as her body burned, her ruby glowing until it cracked and shattered. And in that moment, something answered. From the flames, a shadow moved. A figure. A new fire was born. And it had Jon's face. The flames roared higher, twisting into shapes that shouldn't exist, faces without eyes, voices without mouths, whispering secrets in a language older than the first men. Jon stood frozen, sword limp in his hand, staring at the impossible figure stepping out of the fire. It was him. But not him. The figure wore black armor, glowing with cracks of red light, as if molten fire burned beneath. His eyes were golden, not brown, not blue, but something divine and terrifying. He didn't walk. He glided. Every step shook the earth slightly, and even the dead paused in their charge, as if sensing something far older and more dangerous than themselves. Stannis arrived beside Jon, panting, his sword dripping with dark blood. He followed Jon's gaze, and for the first time, the one-time king whispered, "What in the name of the Seven?" "It's me," Jon said, voice hollow. "Or what I could have been." "No," came a soft voice behind them. It was Davos. "That's not you, lad. That's a shadow born of fire and prophecy." The flaming Jon doppelganger turned its head toward the real Jon, its golden eyes scanning him like a god examining a mortal. Then it spoke, and the ground seemed to shiver at the sound. "You died once. You were brought back for a reason. This is what you were meant to be." Jon stepped back, his breath catching in his throat. "I'm no god." "No," the being said. "You're not. But I am." Viserion circled above, screeching, as if enraged by the thing born of flame. The Night King himself had paused atop his undead dragon, watching from afar, for the first time since Hardhome. He didn't move. The fire being raised its hand toward the sky, and the snow began to melt. Everywhere the flames touched, the ice retreated. Whites ignited like dry paper. The air grew warmer, not with comfort, but with judgment. Tormund and the wildlings stopped fighting. Even the whites staggered back. Stannis grabbed Jon's arm. "Control it, if this thing is you. Make it obey." "I don't think it obeys anyone," Jon muttered. Then the fire being pointed to the godswood, where the Night King was slowly dismounting Viserion. His pale hand reached for his sword of ice. The creature of flame spoke again. "He comes for the heart of the North, for the old magic. If he takes it, nothing will rise again." Suddenly the being turned back toward Jon. "You must choose." "Choose what?" Jon shouted. "Let me in. Become what you were meant to be. Or stay as you are and watch everyone die." Jon's heart pounded. The offer wasn't just tempting, it was terrifying. If he accepted, he didn't know what he'd become. Maybe he'd save them all. Maybe he'd lose his soul in the process. Stannis stepped forward. "Don't be a fool. Take it. The North needs a god, now not a bastard." But Davos pulled Jon back. "Don't listen to him. You've seen what fire can do when it goes too far. Remember Shiren." Jon stared at the fire being. It didn't move, just waited patient like a god or a devil. And then came a sound none of them expected. Hoofbeats. From the western forest, another army charged in sigils of the direwolf and the dragon. Daenerys. She was alive. Riding dragon at the front, her armor glinting, her eyes locked on the Night King. She had come back. Jon turned to the fire being. "I won't give up who I am." "Not yet." The being tilted its head, almost sad. Then it nodded. "Then die a man." With a great gust of wind, it exploded into flame and vanished. Jon looked to the godswood. The Night King was walking toward it. Everything came down to this moment. Jon tightened his grip on Loneclaw. He turned to Stannis, Davos, and Tormund. "We end it? Now." And they ran into the fire. The ground beneath Winterfell shook as if the old gods themselves were waking from slumber. Jon ran toward the godswood, his boots crushing frozen bones and ash. Behind him, Stannis and Tormund followed with blades raised. Davos limped after them, bloodied but unwilling to fall behind. Overhead, Dragon and Viserion clashed in the skyfire against ice. Every time they slammed into each other, the air cracked like thunder. Daenerys rode atop Dragon, her face hard and burning with rage. She had returned not for a throne, but for vengeance. Inside the godswood, the Night King stood motionless beneath the weirwood tree, its red leaves shaking in the wind. His sword of ice rested at his side, but his presence was a storm. The temperature dropped with every step Jon took toward him. His breath froze in his throat. The grass beneath his feet turned brittle and died. Ghost growled beside him, but refused to go any closer. Even the direwolf knew this was not a fight of nature, but of ancient magic. Jon stepped forward, his sword gleaming in the torchlight. "You came for the heart of the North," he said through clenched teeth. "You won't have it." The Night King tilted his head slightly, as if amused. Then, without a word, he raised his hand. Behind Jon, the corpses of fallen men, his own men, began to rise again. "No," Jon muttered. Tormund roared and charged at one of the reanimated men. "They were ours, Jon. We burn them now." Davos shouted, "Back to the fire. Push them into it." But there was no time. The Night King drew his sword of ice and stepped forward. He didn't run. He didn't rage. He moved like death itself, slow, deliberate, final. Jon charged to meet him. Their blades met with a sound like shattering stars. Sparks and frost flew in every direction. Loneclaw, forged from Valyrian steel, hissed against the icy blade. They struck again and again Jon's strikes, fueled by desperation, the Night King's by cold certainty. Every blow shook Jon to the bone. His arm ached, his chest burned. But he kept going. He had to. If he fell, Winterfell would fall next. Then the world. Stannis joined the fight, swinging his sword toward the whites, cutting them down with fury. But his age was showing his strikes slower, his steps heavier. Tormund tackled a white to the ground and tore its skull apart with his bare hands. Jon, end him. But Jon was faltering. The Night King struck his chest, and though the armor held, the force knocked him to the ground. The icy sword lifted for the killing blow. Suddenly, Drogon dropped from the sky, crashing into the godswood and sending trees flying. Daenerys leapt off his back, flames in her eyes. "Dracarys!" She screamed. Drogon unleashed a river of fire at the Night King. The flames roared. The heat blinded everyone. But when the fire faded, the Night King still stood, unburned, unafraid. Jon's eyes widened. No ... not again. The Night King turned his head toward Daenerys and raised his hand. Drogon screamed as dozens of ice spears burst from the ground, tearing into his side. Blood sprayed across the snow. The dragon stumbled back, wings broken. Daenerys screamed and ran to him. And in that moment, the Night King turned back to Jon. It was time. But someone stepped between them. Stannis. He blocked the strike meant for Jon, catching the full force of the Night King's blade in his side. The ice sword pierced through him. Blood splashed across the snow. Jon stared in shock as Stannis collapsed, eyes wide in disbelief. For the realm, he whispered before the light faded from him forever. Rage boiled in Jon's chest. He rose with a scream, Lone Claw glowing faintly in the cold light. He struck once, twice. The Night King parried both effortlessly. But Jon didn't stop. He screamed into the darkness, and something ancient within him answered. His blade burned not with fire, but with light. The same golden light he saw in the flame being. The Night King faltered. For the first time, he stepped back. Jon raised Lone Claw. This wasn't steel anymore. This was judgment. He drove the sword through the Night King's chest. The sound that followed was like the breaking of the world. The Night King's body cracked. Light burst from his eyes, mouth, and chest. Then he shattered into ash and wind, and the whites all around them collapsed. Dead again. Truly dead. Jon stood in silence, blood running down his face, panting in the quiet that followed the storm. Daenerys knelt beside Drogon, sobbing. Tormund dropped to his knees, and Winterfell stood, barely, but it stood. Winterfell lay in ruins. The snow no longer fell, the wind had stilled, and the dead no longer moved. But the silence that followed was not peace, it was grief. Smoke rose from broken towers, stained with ash and blood. Fire still burned in corners of the castle, licking the sky like ghostly fingers reaching for gods that never answered. Jon Snow stood at the center of the godswood, surrounded by fallen trees and broken bodies. The ancient heart tree still stood, its red leaves whispering softly in the breeze, as if mourning the cost of survival. In front of him, the scattered ash of the Night King shimmered faintly before disappearing into the wind. He had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. Nearby, Daenerys knelt beside Drogon's massive body. The dragon breathed shallowly, blood oozing from deep wounds, his black scales cracked and broken. She placed a hand on his side, whispering in high Valyrian, her voice thick with tears. He blinked slowly, barely clinging to life. "He fought for us," she said without turning. "And we couldn't even protect him." Jon stepped closer. "He saved all of us." She looked up at him, eyes red, not just from grief but rage. "You killed the Night King," she said coldly. "You did what I couldn't." Again, Jon shook his head. "This wasn't about power, Dany. It was survival." She rose slowly, brushing blood from her hands. "But now it is about power, Jon. The people saw what you did. They saw what you became." Her voice cracked. "They'll follow you. I don't want them to follow me, but they will." The tension between them now wasn't just about battle. It was about what came after. There were no more dead to fight. Now there were only the living, and their hunger for kings and queens. Behind them, Tormund, bruised and bloody, approached. "What now, Crow?" Jon didn't answer, because he didn't know. He had lived through the end of the world, only to face something even harder, what to do after. Then came Davos, limping, sorrow in his eyes. "We lost too many. Half of the wildlings are gone. The north is wounded, and Stannis, he's dead. Again, no king left to claim the south." "Good," Jon muttered. "Let them all stay gone." But Davos wasn't finished. "The lords are speaking already. They saw you face the Night King, Jon. You didn't just fight him. You burned like the flame. That wasn't just a sword in your hand. It was something else. Something bigger." Jon's face hardened. "I am not their savior, but they think you are," Davos said quietly. "And that matters more than what you think." Jon turned back to the godswood and stared at the old tree. That was when he noticed someone else was there. Melisandre's burnt robe lay in the snow, but beside it stood a child. A girl, with red hair and a soft, glowing smile. Jon blinked. "Shiren?" The child didn't speak. She simply looked up at the tree, then at Jon, and then vanished into the wind. He turned to Davos, shaken. "Did you see that?" Davos looked pale. "I saw her. I swear it. The gods were not done with Jon Snow." And then, as if the world wasn't yet finished testing him, horns blew again, outside the walls. Jon rushed to the battlements, sword back in hand. A southern army approached, banners of lions. The golden lion of House Lannister. And at the front Jaime Lannister. Not with an army of conquest, but of surrender. Daenerys joined Jon on the wall, her voice like a knife. "They've come to kneel, haven't they?" "No," Jon whispered. "They've come to decide." Winterfell had survived the Night King, but what followed would be darker still. Because now came the battle for the living, for loyalty, for crowns, for truth. And this time, there was no chosen prince to save them all. Only a bastard who never wanted the throne. And a queen who'd burn the world to keep it.